Tonight's speaker is an old friend of the speaker series and multiple time presenter. Jack Bales spent 40 years as a research librarian at Mary Washington University in Fredericksburg, Virginia. He's published numerous articles on various topics in addition to baseball. And he has books on various American authors like Horatio Alger, Kenneth Roberts, Esther Forbes, and Willie Morris. We always had a copy of, my grandmother always had a copy of a Kenneth Roberts novel in her little bookcase, Lydia Bailey. And I'm sure she thought it was a family history of some sort. Nevertheless, we probably know Jack best for his Cubs themes books. Before They Were Cubs and the Chicago Cub Shot for Love, a showgirl's crime of passion. Jack gets a little questionable in that one, but nevertheless, it's worth reading. Tonight, he's going to speak on a 19th century baseball sports writer, Lewis Meacham. Excuse me. Meacham was in many ways the voice of William Hulbert at the Chicago Tribune. But when Jack started to dig more deeply into Meacham's life, he found many oddities that he will resolve for us tonight. So, Jack, if you want to pull up your
okay. Let me share my screen here, I guess. And let me click on this here and then share it. And that should be it. And let me get on to here and there we go. I'm all set now.
Yes. And, okay. And let me just say one thing. If you want to, one thing for the attendees, if you go up to the view button up at the top and click it and go by the side-by-side speaker, you'll have the fewest heads. You only have Jack's head showing up there and the most of the screen with the slides. So Jack, go ahead.
Okay, everybody. Okay. Whoops. Okay, now we're all set. Okay, William Hulbert. Good evening, everybody. And first of all, and thanks so much for being here. I look forward to giving this presentation. It's going to be a lot of fun too, and you'll roll your eyes as much as I did while working on it, I think, and all the oddities, as Bob said. So William Hulbert, president of the Chicago White Stockings, a team now known, of course, as the Chicago Cubs, was a principal force behind the 1876 founding of the National League. And baseball histories note that he was assisted by his friend Lewis Meacham, who was a sports reporter for the Chicago Daily Tribune. But besides Meacham's articles in the Tribune and his help in promoting the National League, very, very little is known about the man himself. In baseball histories, it doesn't get that much press. He's usually referred to as Hulbert's quote-unquote mouthpiece, that is, one who supports Hulbert and one who presents his views. That's pretty much about that, pretty much it. But I found out he was a lot more than just that. And I found out that he was very widely respected throughout his journalism career. In fact, when he died unexpectedly at age 32 in 1878, no fewer than 5 organizations released laudatory resolutions in his honor. But scattered among all the accolades, there were also some critical comments. And a reporter in Meacham's home state in Vermont wrote that he was, quote, a born newspaper writer, capable of filling creditably the highest position and was a writer of great clearness and force. But there was also this very odd comment about him being erratic and commented about his eccentricities. Rather cryptic observation here. And as you will find out, as I found out, erratic and eccentric may be very near the mark. And it's almost like he had a double life. Okay, records show 2 birthplaces, 2 birth dates, 2 burial locations, 2 entries in the popular website Find a Grave, and both of them are incorrect. Even 2 names. He fought in the Civil War, and I came across 2 military ranks after serving in the Union Civil Army, and even 2 terms of military service. And on top of that, let's throw in all these fabricated middle initials that were given to him, and also a few embellishments and fabrications that he made up himself. No, Lewis Meacham certainly got around. But not surprisingly, I was mighty confused when I was confronted with all this mess, but gradually everything started falling into place. And not only do I have answers to these questions, but I have theories as to what contributed to some of this misleading information that's out there anyway. So here's a basic family tree for Lewis Meacham. And his grandfather and his uncle were both named Lewis, which is how he got his name, his first name. And his father, James, married twice. His first wife, Carolyn, died in childbirth, and their son, Elias, lived for just 1 year after that. Then he married Mary Gifford, and they had two children. Lewis was born in 1846, and Lewis had a sister named Emma. Okay. And the Meacham family was very well known in Vermont. James Meacham has his own Wikipedia page, in fact. He was born in Rutland, Vermont, was graduated from Middlebury College, went to seminary, was ordained as a congregational minister. He served as pastor of the New Haven, Vermont Congregational Church until 1846. He was subsequently elected to Congress and as a member of the Whig Party, and served from 1849 until his death in 1856. Now we'll get to his son, Lewis. He was born in New Haven, Vermont on March 8, 1846. He attended Phillips Academy, a preparatory school in Andover, Massachusetts, where he's a member of the Philomathian Debate Society and was on the executive committee of the Society's literary magazine called The Mirror. He was at Middlebury College for his freshman year, and at age 17, he stayed in Starr Hall here, room 7. Note that his middle name is listed here, and this is important, me stressing his name, as you'll find out later on. This is one of the very few times he used the middle name of Henry. Most of the time, it just was Lewis Meacham. From 1864 to 1865, he served in the Civil War. I'll get to that in just a bit. He was then back in Middlebury for 2 years, and in 1866, he won second prize in a speaking contest. He attended Amherst College in the fall of 1867. He never graduated, was listed as a non-graduate of the class of 1869. He was a member of the Delta Kappa Epsilon social fraternity, just as he was at Middlebury College. He then began his journalism career in 1869. He was a proofreader of the Chicago Times newspaper in Chicago, and then he went to the Tribune, where he was a proofreader and then a reporter. Meacham undoubtedly knew the Tribune executive Joseph Medill, and after Medill was elected mayor of Chicago, just a few weeks after the Great Chicago Fire of October 1871, Meacham joined his staff as his private secretary. And by the way, talking about the Great Chicago Fire, Meacham spent some time during the fire perched on top of the rooftop of the Tribune building, taking notes by looking over the side to see what was going on for the paper's next day's story. And the reason he did that, because everybody said that the Tribune building was fireproof. It was not fireproof, and Meacham and a few others did not stay up there for very long. Now, whoops, wrong way here, sorry. Meacham inherited quite a bit of money in the fall of 1872, which he unwisely invested in a couple of unsuccessful business enterprises. He returned to journalism, and by December 1873, he was editor of the Rutland newspaper. He also became a member of a newly organized baseball club, as you can see here. Now, Meacham was interested in baseball, but he also got involved in politics. As I said, his father, James Meacham, served as a congressman, and in July 1874, young Lewis was elected secretary of a Republican town caucus, and its purpose was to elect delegates for a state congressional convention. Now, Lewis was a very up-and-coming politician at this time, it seemed. And in fact, local newspapers were praising him as one who had the inside track to be elected secretary of the Vermont Senate. However, the day after this article appeared, newspapers mysteriously reported that Meacham had suddenly withdrawn his name as a candidate for this position. 2 months later, Meacham resigned from the Herald, Rutland Herald, and in the spring of 1875, he returned to Chicago and the Tribune. And by the summer, he was the paper's baseball reporter, and he soon became the Tribune's sports editor. And he received high praise, as you can see by this article here, for he seemed to have, quote, a special aptitude for newspaper work, and he did it unusually well. But it wasn't all praise. On October 1, he went from the sidelines to the ball field as he tried his hand at umpiring. And it was a game between the White Stockings and the St. Louis Brown Stockings, and Chicago won it 13-9. It was, according to Retro Sheet, it was his only attempt at umpiring. I can see why, judging from looking at this article. It did not go particularly well, as both the spectators and the players were disgusted with Mr. Meacham's laughable errors. But lose Meacham and other things to keep him occupied anyway. Tribune articles point out that he often talked to William Hulbert and other baseball men about the new league, about the National League. In 1877, he even asked Chicago Mayor Monroe Heath if the Chicago White Stockings could lease the land on the lakefront for their new ballpark. Mayor Heath just made the comment that he hadn't really thought much about it, but in any case, in 1878, the White Stockings Lakefront Park did indeed open up. Now, Meacham may have been Hulbert's so-called mouthpiece, but he certainly did not hesitate to speak his own mind, and he could be quite critical about how the Chicago players played on the field and how they performed on the field, and how Meacham performed as the club president. In mid-September 1876, for example, he really complained quite a bit that the owner of the team was less than forthright when reporters asked him about the new year and about which players had been signed to play baseball for the White Stockings. Note that Meacham even had the nerve to comment on Hulbert's weight and his so-called well-fed body. As I said, the players themselves were also on the receiving end of Meacham's rather sharp pen. For example, after one game, Meacham pointed out that, quote, the White Stockings yesterday outbatted their opponents and then lost the game by their wonderful muffing. Now, Meacham was just as direct with other teams. I came across articles illustrating how Meacham and Hulbert particularly resented how the Philadelphia Athletics and other Eastern teams failed to play out their schedules by going out west to play Chicago and other Western teams, thereby naturally denying these teams their fair share of the profits. Hulbert's letters at the Chicago History Museum contain assorted references to Meacham and his involvement in the new baseball league and with other teams as well. And speaking of the behavior of Eastern teams, this letter mentions the quote-unquote crookedness of the Hartford team, with Hulbert noting, quote, I am sorry to hear this gloomy story, but I have no doubts underlined, no doubt it is true. Now, Meacham made a name for himself by keeping baseball fans informed as to what was going on with their favorite teams around the league. He also prepared statistics for Albert Spalding, to a number of publications, including the New York Clipper, a well-known sports and entertainment publication of the time. Now, Cincinnati and Chicago were big rivals in baseball, but that did not prevent Ohio fans and a lot of other fans, too, from recognizing Meacham's hard work and dedication to the sport of baseball. A reporter for the Cincinnati Enquirer noted, for example, that he knew Meacham and appreciated him, quote, as a newspaper man of great ability and a gentleman well worth the meeting, unquote. The reporter added that Meacham was of a great deal of assistance to Albert Spalding while working on his baseball guide, particularly on the averages of the non-National League clubs in the book, and he, quote, furnished much of the fund of information that the book contains, unquote. And about this time, Meacham and about 60 other men met to form an organization which would later be called the Sons of Vermont. It was Meacham's idea, I guess. He said that it occurred to him and a few others who had moved from Vermont to Chicago that they ought to all get together once in a while and socialize. Meet informally, shall we say. They sponsored talks, they held lively discussions, and it was just a very convivial group of people, and they all enjoyed it quite a bit. Uh, Newspapers in 1878 covered more of Meacham's activities. Here he helped to umpire. He did indeed umpire quite a few times, I guess, make a decision and help umpire. He wasn't the umpire. He helped the umpire here in a game between Boston and the Indianapolis Blues. And I found out they were called homeless because in the fall of that year, the club directors found out that they were about $2,500 in debt. They couldn't pay the players that year, and they couldn't sign players for the next year. In fact, they kind of went defunct. They disbanded that year as well. The White Stockings were playing the Grays in nearby Providence at exactly this time, which is why Meacham made it to the game, why he happened to be present. Now, this is something really neat, I thought. This is one of my favorite parts about Meacham. I discovered that he was not only a sports reporter, but he was an intrepid investigative journalist for the Tribune. He had written articles, all these articles exposing confidence men and swindlers in Chicago, for example. And one of the individuals, a man named Joe Coons, tracked down Meacham in a Chicago courtroom and struck him across the face with a cowhide, that is a leather whip. The reporter promptly knocked Coons down, and Meacham weighed 230 pounds and promptly tried to sit on the guy, but instead he tripped and fell all over the guy, who then pulled out a revolver and got up and tried to shoot Meacham with this revolver. But this guy Coons was, men in the court, people in the courtroom accosted Coons, dragged him out of the courtroom, prevented him from shooting Meacham, and carted him off to jail. I thought that was a great story. And as a matter of fact, I did some checking, and sure enough, the Tribune did indeed feature articles about this guy Coons and all his shenanigans, and Meacham's articles about similar confidence men and swindlers in Chicago. In fact, Coons here would his problem, he'd purchase all these items from distributors and not pay for them. And so Meacham tracked him down at his home and said, okay, who are your references? You say there's nothing wrong here. Who are these people you bought things from? And so, Coons gave him the information. Meacham tracked those people down, and they said, no, this guy's bad news here. And so Meacham took great delight in publicizing Coons's many transgressions and crookedness, which led to him almost getting shot. Things at exactly this time, things seemed to be going really well for Meacham, and the Chicago Inter-Ocean newspaper pointed out that he was, quote, in the very prime of manhood. He did have some health problems, though, and he often had stomach pains. On Tuesday morning, October 1, 1878, while working on an assignment, he began to feel ill. Okay. He went home. He felt sharp pains in his stomach. He had stomach pains. The doctor gave him some morphine pills and hypodermic injections, and he felt better for the rest of the day and the evening. At about 10:30 in the next morning, he was offered a glass of wine, which he drank, but then he soon fell back upon his bed in his room on Dearborn Street in Chicago, and he died. The cause of death was biliary colic, and this is an ache in the abdomen which occurs when a gallstone blocks the bile duct. And this is the tube that drains bile from the gallbladder to the small intestine. And this can lead to serious complications such as infection in the gallbladder or in the bile ducts or in the liver. And Meacham's attending physician said that his death was accelerated by heart disease. Meacham was survived by his mother and a younger sister, Emma. The flag on the Chicago grounds for the game the next day was lowered to half-mast. He had his own seat in the sporting section of the press box, and it was draped in mourning, and the players on both sides in the Chicago-Milwaukee exhibition game on October 2nd, they all wore strips of ribbon on their right arms as a show of respect, and to honor him. And as I said earlier, no fewer than 5 organizations passed resolutions to honor him. The Chicago Baseball Club, part of which is reproduced here. The National League released one. His newspaper colleagues in Chicago released one. An organization of Civil War veterans, and lastly, the Sons of Vermont, his social club of Chicagoans who had roots in Vermont. In 1879, Spalding's baseball guide reprinted the National League's resolution. Incidentally, the 8 pallbearers at his funeral were William Hulbert and Albert Spalding, 3 reporters from the Chicago newspapers, the Times, the Tribune, and the Inner Ocean, and another Chicago reporter named Joseph Maitland, who was quite a famous reporter at the time. He published a book on some of his exploits, in fact, and also 2 persons representing the Sons of Vermont. Okay, now the confusion sets in. In the obituaries, the Chicago obituaries, I noticed this. What's with the middle initials of B, E, and S? In fact, I've seen Tribune articles with both E and S. Okay, his name was Lewis Henry Meacham, with Henry being the name of his maternal uncle. And these initials all started with the Chicago obituaries. They were not used before his death. In fact, I usually saw just his first and his last names. Henry was occasionally used. I think I've seen it twice in all the research I did. I thought twice, maybe 3 times, but twice I know of. And I never, ever saw Lewis H. It was either Lewis Meacham 99% of the time, and then Lewis Henry Meacham. Okay, take a look at Retro Sheet and Baseball Reference. They both include the middle initial S in the full name here, as well as the birth date of March 4th. Wrong, he was born on March 8th. And note that they both have different cemeteries. One's Middlebury Cemetery, and one's the Oakwood Cemetery in Chicago. Okay, so I thought the Find a Grave, you all know Find a Grave website. I thought it might shed some light, but unfortunately, in Meacham's case, it was not Find a Grave, but it's Find 2 Graves. Top one, correct. Lewis Henry Meacham, born March 8th, 46, correct. Middlebury Cemetery, we're going to get back to that. The second one, Lewis B, there's that B again. Birth date 1845, no, not correct. Upper right there, that's on his family memorial in Middlebury. That's completely correct. Born in New Haven, March 8th, 46, died in Chicago, October 2nd. We'll get into this burial in a little bit here. Hey, I thought his death certificate would help me. Wrong, it had errors. Lewis S. Meacham, where did this S come about? Okay. Note the age of 33. Wrong. He was not born in 1845. He was born on March 8th, 1846. But the age of 33 also appears on his burial casket, as a brass plate on it bears the inscription, died October 2nd, 1878, Lewis Meacham, aged 33 years, quote unquote. And of course, and of course, look at the place of death here at the bottom, Middlebury, Vermont. The place of where he was born in Middlebury, Vermont. We'll get into that. He was not born in Middlebury. So that death certificate's kind of screwed up by the way. Now, interestingly enough, a genealogist friend of mine, who's a really professional genealogist, told me that she constantly sees these variations in middle initials and ages and birth dates and death dates, etc. She said, quote, many times the variation is a result of someone's wrong interpretation of poor handwriting, maybe that of a census enumerator or a county clerk or even a newspaper reporter. It's really not unusual at all. But one thing, though, I've indeed verified, which I don't want to get into because I don't have that much time, is his name really was Lewis Henry Meacham. As you can see, obituaries vary as to birth year and age, but I found March 8th, 1846 in quite a few reliable sources. But then I wanted to find out, make some sense of all this. And in all my research, I noticed people talking about the Vermont Genealogy Library in Essex Junction, Vermont. So one of the staff members, I wrote them, and one of the staff members, they all got really excited about this. And one of the staff members told me that my project was, quote, very interesting, especially for a few of our researchers who are baseball fanatics. And the lead researcher in my project is a professional genealogist and the current editor of the journal Vermont Genealogy. And he was, as I was told, one of the, quote, foremost experts on Vermont genealogy. So that was nice to hear. And the researchers corroborated what my genealogy friend had already told me, that back then there were no birth certificates and churches were the repositories of church records. And I was pleased when they told me, quote, you have done much of what we suggest to do with this problem, which I kind of made me happy. There was one problem I cleared up rather easily. Some sources that say Meacham was born in Middlebury, some say he was in New Haven. Well, the Vermont Library sent me this source, which I did not know about, which confirmed that Reverend Meacham was ordained in 1838 and left the New Haven, Vermont church on September 10th, 1846. He and his family then moved to Middlebury as he had accepted a teaching position at Middlebury College. This was in September 1846. And by the way, dismissed here is not a pejorative term. Note all these D's over here. And I saw records for I went through this book and I went through ministers who left for other parishes, they left for other teaching jobs, and they all had dismissed from pastorate over after their names. It just meant that they left their jobs. And as you can see, if Reverend Meacham had been the pastor in New Haven from 1838 to September of 1846, it seems extremely unlikely that his son was born in Middlebury in March of 1846. The family simply was not living there at that time. In fact, other reputable sources, I spent a lot of time with this, they all confirmed New Haven as well. And they recommended that I contact the New Haven Congregational Church and ask them, well, I already thought about that. And I wrote them twice, I emailed them twice, had names, email addresses, but they never responded to my email. I even offered, filthy lucre, so to speak, and no response. So where was Meacham buried? Okay, now this is the family memorial in Middlebury, Vermont. Eva Garceland Hart was an extremely helpful archivist there at the Henry Sheldon Museum in Middlebury, and she told me that even though Lewis is included on this memorial and he is listed in the cemetery index in her office, quote, there is no guarantee that his body is also there, unquote. And she told me that Emma, of course, is on the tombstone, the memorial here, but she told me that her name is not even listed on the cemetery index. But I found out that this is not at all unusual. This very well, this marker here, this memorial here, could be what's called a cenotaph, which is a monument erected for the family, and all the family members don't even have to be buried here. Okay, so my next step, was to contact the Oakwood Cemetery in Chicago. And an administrator sent me this note here that, yes, he's buried here. There's a section number and the lot number. But it had not occurred to me that there might not be a headstone. Driving me crazy, folks. And here's a map that pinpoints the location. Up in there's section A3, up at the upper top. I found out that this was the old section up here at the top left here. Now here's something though. Could he have been moved from Oakwood to Vermont? Bob Bailey, you asked me this question. John Thorne did too. And I don't know. I'm hoping that the note in the Oakwood Cemetery means that Meacham is still there, safe and sound in Chicago. That was a great question though. I did discover though, that members of Chicago's Hyde Park Historical Society are studying the cemetery to learn, quote, about the people and the events that influenced our community over the decades. So naturally, I contacted the society and asked them, hey, could somebody help me with this guy's grave over here for me? So immediately, Mallory Price immediately responded to my email. She's a member of the society and said, hey, yes, I could give you a hand. So here's part of her reply. Meacham is buried in lot 208, and here are markers for lots 204 and what appears to be 206 and a half. Unfortunately, his grave marker is not visible. Mallory told me that good old Mother Nature has overtaken a lot of these graves in this particular section, she told me. She also sent me this picture, which shows the general area of the cemetery where Meacham is buried. I'm really grateful to Mallory for all of her help, and she even made a special trip to the cemetery to plot out the only visible markers there in that upper section of the paper of the cemetery, section A3. She told me that it appeared that now some of the overgrown markers are being dug out, and she hopes that as things get cleared up, maybe the grave numbering system in this old section will start to make sense, because she told me it doesn't make sense now, this grave numbering system. And it looks like there are no names, just numbers. Okay, let's regroup a little bit before we go on. Okay, here's a slide from the beginning with all my questions here. Okay, there were 2 birthdays. Well, he was born on March 8th. 2 birthplaces, born in New Haven. 2 burial locations. I'm going to go with Chicago. Can't really prove it, but yeah, I'm pretty sure I go with Chicago. And 2 entries in Find a Grave. Well, both have errors, and I addressed all those. So we'll get to his Civil War service now, which is completely new can of worms. Now, this is all wonderful information, but there was still some mystery about his Civil War years. And the Amherst Directory says that Meacham was a private and that he was promoted to lieutenant in the Civil War and that he served for 3 years. But some sources say he served for 1 year and he mustered out as a corporal. Even worse, I checked military indexes and databases all over the web, paper, online, everything. I could find absolutely no record of him having served at all. Then I came across this web page. Meacham was in the 186th New York Infantry Regiment, and on May 30th, 1865, he was transferred to New York's 79th Infantry, also known as the Highlanders. He was mustered out as a corporal on July 14th, 1876, but look, he enlisted as Lewis M. Shattuck was his name of enlistment. So after that, I could easily find information on him. As in the previous source, this document says he left the service as a corporal and not as a lieutenant. It adds that both he and his company were mustered out. That is, he did not leave the service early due to sickness or injury. Here are his discharge papers. It notes his day of enlistment. It indicates that he was to serve for 3 years, but instead he served for less than 1 year, leaving the military with a rank of corporal. Okay, so that sums up things up nicely right here, but it gets even better. This is from, excuse me, just a second here. It gets even better here. November 1866, Meacham, he was then a student at Middlebury College. He filled out an application for a $100 Civil War bounty. In the United States Equalization Act of 1866 provided this sum to all honorably discharged soldiers who had served for at least 3 years. But remember, he served for 1 year. In fact, less than 1 year. So in other words, he kind of lied and misrepresented his Civil War service so he could apply for this stipend, which I guess he got. Okay. And there's his name, Lewis M. Shattuck, and he gave his address in his own handwriting as Lewis Meacham in Middlebury, Vermont. And these Civil War fabrications will crop up over the years in published sources. And I love this document right here. Here he admits that he and Shattuck, and look at the arrows I have here. Here I have arrows by Lewis Meacham and Lewis Shattuck's name. He admits he and Shattuck are one and the same, that he has an arrow by 20. He's 20 years old. This corroborates his birth year of 1846, not 1845. And he admits that he left the Army with the rank of corporal. I got the bottom arrow with that. Okay. So it's not, I wouldn't say it's nicely all tied up in a nice ribbon, because there's one big question left. The name Shattuck come from? Well, guess what? I think I got an answer to that. I went through all of Meacham's college catalogs from when Meacham was in school, and I discovered that Meacham and one George Shattuck were classmates. They were freshmen together at Middlebury College. So that kind of gave me a clue that maybe that's where the word Shattuck came out. And especially later when I found out that they were at Middlebury, as not Middlebury, Amherst as well. Here are their college years. Remember that Meacham's Middlebury enrollment was interrupted by his Civil War year of 1864 to 1865. He was then back at Middlebury for 2 more years. He and Shattuck undoubtedly knew each other, perhaps both and after Meacham's year in the military. Meacham did not graduate from Amherst. He was listed in their directories as a non-graduate of the class of 1869. He and Shattuck were both students in 1867. So depending upon when the school term started and ended, they may have overlapped for a time. Of course, they knew each other, though. Now here are I love this page here, you guys. Here are brief biographies from an Amherst directory. Once again, there is that fabricated service record up there where the arrow is of 1862 to 1865. All that fabrication of him being a lieutenant too. And note, it's interesting that his years at Middlebury are not even listed here because that would conflict with his supposed Civil War service, you know. So, and of course, we all get these requests for our records and everything. So I'm sure he himself listed this. He gave this information to this college directory as well. And his years of service could not be included here because chronologically they would not make sense. And by the way, note the 4th line there, Tudor Christian College. This was the Union Christian College in Meacham, Indiana. He was not a tutor there. He taught mathematics for 5 weeks in early 1868, though, and I'm not surprised about this. The newspapers at that time all had these big articles saying he was a full professor there at the college, at the at the Union Christian College. And this prompted the president of at Union Christian College to get this vociferous and heated denial, saying he was not a full professor. He taught mathematics there for a few weeks. And so I wonder, since Meacham inflated his being a private to a lieutenant, I wonder if in the papers, he knew all the Vermont editors anyway. I'm sure if he promoted himself to be a full professor in the Vermont papers, it wouldn't surprise me. Note, his pal Shattuck there was a doctor. Okay. I did some more digging and I found out that many years after Meacham's death, a representative from Phillips Academy contacted Middlebury College for biographical information for an alumni directory. See, this is what I mean about they supplied this information. And someone located Meacham's sister, Emma Meacham Davis, who in 1910 supplied this paragraph. Okay, a lot of errors here. Okay, first of all, men had to be 18 to enlist. So Meacham was not underage when he signed up. And from what I gather from doing this research, recruiters often paid no attention to age requirements, especially in 1864 when the Union was desperate for men. Note his sister's comments about him being a lieutenant in the war. As we noted, this all started with Meacham himself. As far as being taken prisoner at Bull Run, Meacham was a member of the 79th Infantry, which fought at both battles of Bull Run, but that was in 1861 to 1862, and he didn't enlist until 1864, so he could not have been wounded there. In fact, obituary said this, but I could not confirm in his service records about him being wounded and being captured by the Confederates or even having contracted the disease. He did have stomach pains, by the way. We may think it's unusual for people to change their names like this, but I found out that during the Civil War, this was not unusual. For instance, some wanted to avoid angry comments from relatives, from family members who were on the other side. Some wanted to just not have their family and friends worry. By the way, this is the only source I found that mentions Meacham running away, but it's certainly possible. And here are some feasible reasons for his enlistment. Okay, we know that Lewis came from a prominent family, very prominent family in Vermont. His father, James, was a member of Congress. James's brother was a Vermont state senator, very politically corrected. Maybe they might have worried about Meacham. They didn't want anything to happen to him, so they used their contacts to prevent him from being enlisted in the Civil War. I did find out that this had happened. So his running away to enlist and changing his name seems quite plausible. Now, remember how Lewis was in politics, but dropped out of that state Senate race? Maybe he was tired of living in his family's political shadow. Maybe he didn't want to follow in their family's footsteps. Maybe he wanted to get rid of the family name and branch out on his own, where he would not be affiliated with the family. So he enlisted in the Civil War under a different name. Of course, maybe he might have felt inferior to his very prominent family members, and he felt the need to prove himself and stand out from the rest of them. In fact, in light of his Civil War exaggerations, which made him stand out even more, this is also a possibility. Let's go back to this mysterious obituary that mentioned Meacham and his eccentricities. This is from the newspaper Meacham used to edit, for example, remember? So this is a town he used to live in. So you would expect that you would think that the comments would be positive. In 1872, Meacham inherited some money and went into business with his uncle in a brush factory in Burlington, Vermont. It didn't succeed. He went out west to Colorado and started raising sheep. Now, raising sheep, where did that come from? That didn't make any sense. Didn't work out either. So I keep thinking about the eccentric Lewis Meacham. He apparently had no experience with these things. So he came back maybe with his tail between his legs to work on the hometown paper. And maybe the editor of this paper knew about the Civil War service, knew about the businesses, and that's where the eccentricities came about. Of course, this is only one reporter, and so maybe he had an axe to grind with Meacham anyway. So, and this was his way of getting back. We don't know. I've tried mightily to find a photograph of the elusive Lewis Meacham. The best I could do was get a photograph of his pal, Lewis Shattuck, there at Middlebury and Amherst. So, we're winding up, folks. Let's look at this earlier slide in which I mentioned the various inconsistencies I found. As you can see, there are now answers to these questions. His middle initial, they were wrong, but I want to get back to that, though. His middle initials, one name used in the Civil War was an alias. 2 Civil War ranks, he was indeed a corporal. 2 terms of service, we got his discharge papers. He served for 1 year. Now, I discussed my research problems with these genealogists at the Vermont Genealogy Library, who was so helpful before. And one of them said that in terms of errors on newspaper obituaries, much of the time the mistakes stem from what he calls sloppy reporting, quote unquote, sloppy reporting. That is the careless work of the people who wrote up the obituaries to begin with. And this ties in what I mentioned before about the variations in names and birth dates, etc. And this guy, this really helpful archivist at the Vermont Library, looked at all these errors. I gave him a long list, and he said, quote, "I have never seen such a variety before in this as in this case. My evaluation is this is sloppy reporting." Okay, I want to dwell on this just a little bit. And speaking of reporting, now 4 of Meacham's pallbearers were Chicago reporters. What the genealogist said about the persons who wrote the obituaries being responsible for their content made me kind of wonder if, based on Meacham's flair for the dramatic and his fabrications, if Meacham and or the reporters could have been behind the various middle initials used in the Chicago obituaries. The E could refer to Meacham's stepbrother Elias or his sister Emma. The B could refer to Elias's middle name, and the S is Shattuck. Oh, where else would it be but Lewis Shattuck? Sorry, folks, I'm on a roll here. And I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, so I'm going to drop it right here. But as we have seen, there is a history with Meacham and his name and with his fabrications in general, for that matter. So I couldn't help but think of this possibility. One last item. C. Oric Bishop was on the board of directors of the St. Louis Brown Stockings, and in late 1875, William Hulbert wrote him all about the proposed new baseball league and how Meacham and the Tribune supported the league and particularly supported all the Western clubs. And in his letter, Hulbert notes that, quote, "I am sure that we can trust Meacham." Well, maybe they could if all they talked about was baseball or maybe about raising sheep. But if they asked him about his early life or, hey, Lewis, what was it like in the Civil War? Well, I hope that they took what he said with a grain of salt, if not an entire box. Thank you very much.
Jack, thank you very much.
Okay,
If you'll take the slides on down, we've got
okay, I'm going to X
couple.
out here. Just X
Yeah,
out, right?
that's
Okay.
right. Just X that out, and
Okay.
you can, if you've gone to the speaker view only, you can click on that view in the upper right-hand corner, hit gallery, and everybody else will show up.
Oh yeah, got it right here now. Yes. Okay.
There's a couple of comments. I'm going to find that as soon as in just a moment. Pam Baker made a comment that within her family they have that situation of family names on the headstone, on multiple names on a headstone, or
really, that's great.
And it doesn't happen. And I just have one comment on. Oh, she also comments that it could be that the family just wants all the names of the family together.
Oh, okay.
I guess that's possible, but fundamentally, what you get is a cost savings. What you find on multiple named
did not know that.
stones, you get the engraving of the name and the birth year when you first get the stone, and then you just fill in. All you have to do 30 years later is put the 4 digits in, or the date, have that chiseled in. For example, Hall of Famer Effa Manley is on Abe Manley's stone in Newark, New Jersey, as being buried with him, but she's buried in California many years later. So it's just not that unusual. I like Pam. I've got family members, or my wife's family members in Mississippi, that have got a number of people on the stone, some of which are in another county or something of that nature.
Okay, this is very useful information. I did not know this until I started all this stuff.
Let's see here. We've got, yeah, because Mike Hulbert notes that it's cheaper to have the engraving done at the shop rather than in the cemetery, because you don't have to send somebody out there for that. Here's a question from Mike Hulbert.
Yeah, I see it there.
Yeah, trusting Meacham because he believed Meacham had reliability supporting him in print during the efforts to start the NL. Did he write a good bit about it?
Yeah, he had an extensive letter about all that, which it was very difficult to transcribe, of course, but I finally managed to transcribe it. And yeah, he did. It was basically because of Meacham's help in getting the whole National League started. Well, he wrote about a paragraph about it though, but yeah, it was definitely because he could trust him for his help in getting the National League. I guess I got the impression that he kind of pushed the National League and the Western teams in the Tribune too. So again, he was kind of his right-hand man in that respect. So yeah, during his efforts to start the National League, and that's what he meant.
Did he did Meacham travel to any of the meetings forming the league, or would he just get information from Hulbert?
I remember when I was working on my Cubs book, he did. I know it was in, I think it was in the Spalding Guide, one of the Spalding Guides, that he had a list of people who were there, and at least one year he was there with Hulbert in attendance. I can't remember which year it was, and it could have been more than 1 year, but I do recall 1 year.
Woody Eckert writes or asked a question if Meacham perhaps was involved in the early planning for the National League, or did he just get on once Hulbert decided to go forward? That I think the first starts of discussion were right after the 1875 season where the Western baseball interests had a meeting in December.
In December, right? Yeah, it could. I don't know one way or the other. And in fact, if I expand on this research, I'll have to go through the Chicago papers and see, especially the Tribune, and see what articles were in the late 1875. I knew there was a major one in December of 1875. I'm not sure. Now, Hulbert's obituary that I had at the very beginning, it said that they, of course, who knows, who can trust the obituary, as we found out, but they said that the two of them matured the plan for the National League. So I suspect he probably was, but I just can't say for sure. But it's something I definitely, and I wrote a note about it here, that something I'm going to try to find out.
Very good. I think that gets through all the comment. Jack, it's a fascinating thing. You know, even Meacham had all these ins and outs of his life where it's self-reporting on some of it, and some of it is lousy reporting on the part of third parties that may have done some of this thing. But it was an interesting life, and although he had a important role to play in baseball history,
I see.
He died so young.
He did.
You don't have much to go on there other than third-party reports.
See, Kerry asked about a folder at the Library of Congress called the Lewis M. Shattuck Civil War Papers, 65 to 66. Now, I vaguely remember seeing that, and I can't remember, and maybe I just forgot about it after a while. But thank you very much. I'm definitely going to pursue that. I live close by the Library of Congress. I can easily get that, and maybe it's even online. And so I'll make a note of that. Thank you very much for. That could be something entirely new. I'm going to try to expand this for SABR's biography project because there's nothing on him right now. In fact, I even requested to be a placeholder for that, to hold that for me.
Well, thank you very much for not only the presentation, but all the effort that went in to try and dig out these tiny questions that come up that became big controversies within his life, and trying to put some sense to them and some finality to them. Thank you very much, Jack.
Well, thanks to all of you guys. Yeah. Thank
Peter,
you.
You're muted.
Thanks, everybody, for all your interest and your questions. I thoroughly enjoyed this. Make my day here.
You're muted, Peter.
You're muted, Peter.
There he is.
Okay, I'm sorry. Karen, were you trying to ask a question or a comment? Okay, I think she logged off. All right, I'm sorry.
Dixie had a
Yeah, go ahead, Dixie.
comment.
I was going to pass my time to Karen because I saw her waving her hand, but I think she's gone.
Yeah.
Shoot. Okay.
I wasn't sure. Okay. Dixie, did you have anything to say?
No.
Okay. Jack, thank you. What I said was, do you think that this is a bit of a case of the red badge of courage?
Oh, yeah. Hadn't thought about that. Yeah, right.
And maybe that author isn't so off the mark.
Can I ask you guys a question? Do you think I'm just kind of like being a conspiracy theorist when I talk about the middle initials? I probably am, but I couldn't help but notice them,
No, you're not being a conspiracy theorist.
Okay.
Anytime anybody goes into cemeteries and looks for stuff, it happens all the time.
Yeah.
Don't even think about it. It's just going to happen.
Yeah.
And when you, particularly when you're looking at 19th century handwritten documents, it's hard to tell a J from an L sometimes.
Yeah.
And when they use cursive, it just gets very strange. And sometimes people guess.
Right.
It's time to write down a name, so they stick something in there.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't want to get into too long of a story, but I have a similar situation with a middle name, and it was not at all the middle name. It comes from something totally different. And Peter Morris pointed it out to me many years ago. And what is a very good source, by the way, of anything, and in this case it doesn't apply, but is a marriage certificate. Because marriage certificates usually occur at a time and a moment when people are very genuine, you know. And in this case, it was the marriage certificate that really did give me the real middle name, and then I made the connection of where that name came from.
Oh,
So it was kind of interesting.
yeah.
All right, but Jack, that was I can't imagine the intrigue and the frustration
Oh, yeah.
that you must have encountered doing this research.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
A lot of fun, though.
Well, I can imagine.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to move on. Next month, we have another presentation by Justin McKinney, who's presented before, and I find this one to be a very an interesting topic. Also, is whatever happened the 1890 Philadelphia Athletics, how a pennant contender became the worst team of all time. So Justin will be presenting that on November the 14th, if you care to mark your calendars. I also just want to mention that 2 weeks from tonight, we have our book club session, and we're going to be discussing the middle book of William Reisek's, Bill Reisek's classic series of 3 histories that he wrote in reverse order. So he wrote Blackguards and Red Stockings first. The middle book, which I will be discussing, is When Johnny Came Sliding Home, which is about the basically about the post-Civil War era before the NA gets created, and then but that, you know, what's interesting is that Bill kind of explains why he wrote the chronological last book first, because he didn't know any better, is what he admits to, that he didn't know what preceded the NA. And as he began to write the book on the NA, Blackguards and Red Stockings, he began to question, well, where did all this come from? And that's how he wrote When Johnny Came Sliding Home. So it'll be 2 weeks from tonight. All right, and I want to thank everyone, Bob, again for initiating this series, now going into its 4th season. And Jack, again, thank you very, very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much for tuning in.
Thank you.